Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Open Democracy Book Club. This is our 7th book. Open Democracy is a nonpartisan nonprofit based in Concord, New Hampshire, but we're excited to have folks join us. It looks like we have folks from California to Washington, D.C., and our crew here in New Hampshire, and Connecticut. So welcome from everyone who has joined us. Today's book, my name is Olivia Zink, the Executive Director. Our book club format is slightly different this time. We don't have the authors with us today, but we have a short video from the authors. But we'll start tonight's program with a land acknowledgement. Sarah, over to Sarah.
Good evening, everyone. So yeah, we're going to start with a land acknowledgement. Open Democracy Action acknowledges that Open Democracy acknowledges that we do our work on Indakina, the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways on the Aonombak, the people who have stewarded Indakina throughout the generations and continue to do so today. And what you see on the screen is an image of Indakina. And just gratitude to Indigenous New Hampshire Collaborative Collective. They have a lot of great info and work on their website if you want to check them out. And feel free, as you're introducing yourself in the chat, to also acknowledge the land that you're on. I'm zooming in from Keene.
Joe, do you want to take us away? Oh, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. Well, as some of you may know, the theme of this book club is, where are we? How did we get here? And what are we going to do about it? Now, this book is especially relevant, but also a little bit different, in that it shows us, to some extent, where we are by telling us stories of how other democracies in recent years have arisen and died, and the causes of their death. It has messages and lessons that we ought to learn. In reading this book, I thought a bit about Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol, which shows us, as this book does, what our future might be if we don't change our ways. And with that thought, I'll turn it back to Olivia or Kate.
Kate, to the video.
I'm leaving that to you and Sarah to hit the video.
I will share the video.
Yeah, great.
And then we'll have you say a few words after the video.
Perfect.
Now, there are very good arguments, I think, for eliminating the Electoral College. It's a very, I don't think it's going to resolve all of our problems. It will prevent I mean, 40% of the last presidents have been determined by someone other than the winner of the popular vote. There's a problem with that. So I think you can make an argument, a good argument, for eliminating the Electoral College, but even that would not eliminate the problems of polarization that we highlight in the book.
The person who spoke second, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
That we highlight in the book.
The person who spoke second, I'm sorry, I forgot names.
If you're a homeowner in New Hampshire, then listen closely, because under no circumstances can you afford to click skip. I'm going to show you.
Apologize.
Steve, you suggested the Democrats should practice forbearance. If they do, the Republicans will just bully them more. Won't it just become a cycle and make it worse if the Democrats don't fight back with the same tactics as the Republicans.
If you're a homeowner in New Hampshire, then listen closely, because under no circumstances can you afford to click skip.
I want to say, first of all, that this is a really tough dilemma. First of all, anytime you elect as president, somebody's not fully committed to democratic rules of the game, oppositions are in a tough place, because if they put their guard down, they can get stepped on, as we've seen in many countries. But if they fight, it can often spiral even worse. So there's no easy choice. There is no easy choice for opposition. And as what the Democrats have to do is take advantage of institutional opportunities. We continue to have free elections in this country. Democrats need to win the election. And when the government, that's the single best blow for democracy that the Democrats can land in the next year. The choice what to do when you get punched in the gut by a bully, when you get sucker punched, is a tough one. We have no magic bullet solution to that, none. But we have seen democracies die in every continent on earth, except the Middle East, where there haven't been any democracies. And we've seen this movie before. The spiraling erosion of democratic norms can kill democracies. And so it's a very, very serious dilemma that Democrats face. So if they're going, it's very hard to identify the point. There is a point where you have to fight back. There is a point where opposition needs to engage in hardball. I would say that one, it needs to be deliberated seriously. That Democrats have to be very careful about that choice. And secondly, if they do it, if they employ hardball tactics, they should build the biggest possible coalition behind it. It's really important that they bring in as many actors from red states, from the Republican Party, from the private sector as possible, and have it not be a partisan spiral, because the costs of fighting back, as reasonable as it is, can be deadly for democracy in the long run.
Quick comment, then quick question. Comment is something you didn't mention that's more recent, which is that now we see Congress being faced with adopting major legislation with no public hearings, no time for deliberation and comment, and that is truly frightening. And second, my question is particularly Mr. Ziblatt. I looked for your name before.
Thank you.
You seem to use demagogue and authoritarian as the same interchangeably, although maybe it's demagoguery leads to authoritarianism. Are they the same thing, or are there some shades of gray, particularly maybe on the demagogue side?
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you for the questions. So on the first point, I mean, this is something we recount in the book, because I think what you're describing, it's not the point about Congress not doing its job. In effect, I mean, that the procedures for considering legislation have changed. I mean, this is, we kind of recount this, and one way to think about this is that each of the branches of government have a certain constitutional role to play, and Congress you can think of as having a kind of guard dog role to play. Which is to kind of watch for abuses of power. One thing that makes us nervous, I mean, what happens when forbearance declines is that you kind of get this oscillation between attack dogs and lapdog Congresses. So in which, when the other party's in charge, the Congress turns into an attack dog and blocks anything from happening. And when your own party's in charge of the presidency, then the Congress turns into a lapdog and kind of protects essentially the president doesn't do its constitutional duty. And so this dynamic is in part driven, I think, by polarization, party polarization. So that's how we kind of think about these things connecting. In terms of demagogue and authoritarian, so demagogue, this is a classical Greek kind of phenomena that was written about by Thucydides. I mean, it's a tricky term, because demagogue is a representative of the people. So this sounds very democratic. I mean, all democratic politicians at some level are demagogues. But the way that people have, I think, have thought about this and theorists have written about this, and the way we think about this is that a demagogue is somebody who responds to the whims of the people, but doesn't act in responsible ways. Now, of course, responsibility is a bit in the eye of the beholder, you know, but there's a way in which a demagogue is one who plays to the worst instincts in the crowd. And so, you know, we talked about the politicians needing to stand up and say at points, you know, this is not acceptable behavior and I'm not going to give into it, even if it's unpopular. This is not what a demagogue does. Now, the relationship between demagogues and authoritarianism, I mean, as we pointed out, one of the things that's transformed since the end of the Cold War is the way that authoritarians come to power now is often through elections. And so rather than being generals coming to power through, you know, Pinochet in Chile coming to power through a military coup, the way authoritarians come to power is through elections. And so they often are demagogues.
So in the 1860 election, Abraham Lincoln wasn't on the ballot in 9 states. And then during the Civil War, he suspended habeas corpus. So aren't these examples of like democratic norms eroding away during the Civil War? So how are we able to overcome those? And how can we apply that today and see a difference with 2016 versus the 1860s?
This is not going to be a happy tale. And
Good question.
yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, what the Civil War is a really great comparative case for us, because it's a case where if you look at political discourse, first of all, intense polarization over slavery in the 1850s, that led to a clear erosion of mutual toleration. This country was not born with mutual toleration. The Federalists and the Republicans in the 1790s considered each other traitors who were trying to destroy the Republic. But over the course of the first decades of the 19th century, the second generation, the generation that followed our founders, did establish these sort of embryonic democratic norms, including mutual toleration. It was partly invented in the United States in the early 19th century. Those norms were shattered in the polarization over slavery, particularly between the white Southern planters who ran the Democratic Party in the South and the emerging Republican Party, which was allied with the abolitionist movement. Southern Democrats, if you look at discourse in the late 1850s and around the 1860 election, considered the Republicans traitors and called them that. And the and abolitionists saw the Southern Democrats the same way. So you saw a total erosion of mutual toleration and eventually the collapse of the regime. U.S. democracy broke down in the early 1860s. And in fact, the norms that collapsed remained very weak well after the Civil War. This surprised us as we did our research. 1870s, even into the 1880s, you saw really low levels of partisan tolerance between Republicans and Democrats. Keep going back to
Waving the bloody shirt.
yes. So how does it get resolved? It gets resolved in a tragic way. The Republicans' decision to abandon goals of racial equality, to abandon Reconstruction, to abandon efforts to enforce the recent constitutional amendments guaranteeing suffrage to African Americans in the South, and the Republicans' willingness to allow the Democrats, first of all, to strip away suffrage for African Americans, which had been granted, and to consolidate single-party authoritarian rule in the South. That is what allowed Democrats and Republicans to come together. Once Republicans allowed racial equality to be removed from the political agenda, Democrats, for the first time in 30 years, stopped seeing Republicans as an existential threat. And so mutual toleration increased, and they were able, in effect, to play nice for the first time since really the birth of the Republican Party. And so paradoxically, tragically, the norms that were rebuilt in the late 19th century, which I mentioned, which sustained our democratic system throughout the 20th century, were built and to a large extent sustained on racial exclusion. Told you it wasn't a happy story.
Yeah, so, I mean, let me just add something. I mean, I hear some of you murmuring and muttering at that answer. I mean, I think the reality is history doesn't move always in the same direction. I mean, there's ways in which, you know, this was a tragic part of our history. And at some level, you know, the point of our book is to try to think about how we can combine these norms of mutual toleration and forbearance with a more fully democratic society that we are today. So that's really the challenge and the dilemma that this account that Steve just gave suggests.
Thanks for a great presentation. I liked it. Thank you, found it very enlightening, and I especially liked your answer to the last question, which I found especially enlightening. So, and I appreciate the idea of the soft, what you were calling the soft guardrails, and the importance of those. I guess a quick comment. It strikes me that polarization, extreme polarization, partisanship is sort of a symptom rather than a cause, and yet you sort of wanted to describe it as a cause rather than as a symptom. But here's the question that really seems even more fundamental. You're saying we can't really depend on we shouldn't count on the Constitution really to protect us here. And the specific question I have is, what are the limits of the Supreme Court and our judiciary, but our Supreme Court in particular, in using the Constitution as a protection against the worst outcomes? I don't know what happened with the Supreme Court in the Civil War, how that things played out there, but what are the limits of the court in protecting us?
If you're a homeowner in New Hampshire, then listen closely, because under no circumstances can you afford to click skip.
Kate, it's over to you. Sorry about that.
I was hoping for the answer about the soft guardrails. We were going to go for one more answer, if we could just skip the ad and just hear this one answer, and then I'm going to take it.
I lost it, Kate.
Oh, okay. All righty. Well, so it goes. Anyway, I hope that was helpful for you to see our authors. And I think some of the kinds of questions that were asked in that Politics and Prose bookstore in Washington are the kinds of questions that I've heard as some of us have discussed this book. And I think the main question is, how does what they wrote about in 2018 translate to where we are now? What are the through lines and the threads? To again to repeat Joe, where are we? How did we get here? And what do we do about it? Where are we going from here? So the next part of our evening is us all being in breakout rooms. Again, because we didn't have the author and Q&A, we have a little bit more extra time for our breakout rooms. So we'd like to allow 40 minutes and hope that that's not too much for you. My experience of the breakout rooms is that sometimes it's a little slow to get started, but then once everybody's talking, you don't want to stop. And we have breakout rooms without a leader. So you'll have to sort of figure out how to manage the conversation flow. And then when we come back, then we'll really talk about, I consider it like we're sort of crowdsourcing our wisdom. 45 people here who've read either the book or maybe the magazine article and watched the video or heard these guys talk somewhere, or have thought about the comparative question of how our democracy is headed. And so then in the end, we'll just quite robustly share our thoughts about where do, the New York Times article was called, "Where does American democracy go from here?" So I think that's what we're all going to be talking about and how. And as I say, crowdsourcing all of our thoughts, questions, anxieties, worries, hopefulnesses in the breakout rooms. And then I see Anita's done a plug to the, how we can get the rest of it. And then we'll come back and share. And I think that's it, unless any of Doreen.
Yeah, so I think the report back question is really, the author gave us advice on securing our democracy and building a broad coalition. And so when we think about building a multiracial democracy, what are we going to do as an individual going forward? And put the author's advice into practice. So that's really a question to anchor us. So when you get the 5-minute warning, make sure your group has discussed those actions that people can take in order to move our democracy forward. So we'll break out now into our rooms. Oh, is there a Corinne, do you have a question before we go forward?
I do. Kate, do you know if that interview was done before or after the January 6th insurrection?
Before.
That's right. Okay.
Yep.
All right. I think that makes a difference.
Yep.
And I did not read the book. Now I've already read the book, but it was when it was first written. And I just started now, and I'm taking it from a whole different perspective, knowing that. So I just wondered where that interview was from. Thank you.
Right. That was well before that. It was more when the book came out. So
Okay, that's what I thought.
It's
Thank you.
pre-COVID, it's pre-January 6th. And the article in the Times is post those things, and is also post the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So I think, you know, when we come to where we are now, Zelensky has talked about it fairly recently. So the through lines are not too separated, even though there are big events in between when the book was written and when we're talking about it. So again, some of the concepts and questions.
I think the book was written after the 2016 election.
Correct. It was written in 2018.
Oh, yeah.
So
So
throughout
it's
the book, we're
kinda-
talking about the current president as very much Trump and the Republican. Yeah, absolutely. They're 2 years into it. But we're now 2022. So good. Thanks for those questions. Anything else to get you going on your breakout room? Or should we go ahead and break it out?
Go ahead.
Thanks, Forrest.
Breakout rooms. Okay, your room should be open. If anyone has trouble joining, let us know.
Gonna follow up. Oh, right, good. All right, we're recording, which is wonderful, so that we can create a YouTube out of this. This quotation by E.B. White came right at the very end of the book. And as many of you probably have read Charlotte's Web or Stuart Little to your kids, but E.B. White was way more than that. And this was written in 1943, in the middle of the war. And I just liked so many things about it. It sort of says some things that democracy is. It's the don't in don't shove. It's the recurrent suspicion that more than half of the people are right more than half of the time. This speaks to what Levitsky and Zablat talk about norms. You know, it's a norm. Don't shove, so don't. You know, it's the feeling of the privacy in the voting booths, which is something we talked a lot about in our breakout group. The feeling of communion in the libraries. One of our members talked about the common good, the feeling of not just me, but the common good. Democracy is a letter to the editor. Practical, something you can do, and people in our groups have done a lot of that. Democracy is the score at the beginning of the ninth. You don't really know who's going to win at the end. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then he says, democracy is a request from the war board in the middle of a morning, in the middle of a war, wanting to know what democracy is. So E.B. White kind of turns it around there. So we're going to go right back to where we said, democracy is all of us. What we do is part of it, is part of the answer. And our group had lots of ideas, and I think other groups did as well. So if we can put our collective ideas out into the room and start capturing them in the chat, that will be great. So you can take down the quote, I think, Olivia.
Okay. Which group wants to go first? We don't have to go in order.
Fine.
Okay, Forrest.
Well, I shared my story in my group because I have a nonprofit organization that helps with this open democracy. It is New Hampshire grassroots organization, and it's on Facebook. Everybody wants to like the page on Facebook, and it is kind of like that voting rights matter, nothing about us without us, and advocacy is talking about our voices being heard, because it is basically for saying that if you would use your voice and advocate and just move New Hampshire forward, then democracy can live with able New Hampshire.
Okay, so Able New Hampshire is the group. And as Forrest said, you can find links to that on Facebook and other places. Thanks for that, Forrest.
Mhm.
Other groups or other people in that group?
Okay, I'm gonna start calling on folks. David, your group.
Me?
Yeah.
I had the idea that one way to build a larger coalition is to do it through community building. So one way to look at the kind of Trump movement is a flow of people towards a community that they feel they belong in. And so they feel like they're in a group, and they feel like they have like-minded people around them, and that's why they are drawn to kind of that movement. And what we need to do is kind of reverse that trend by creating communities of our own, and doing outreach through non kind of political means, in that maybe like an organization goes out and does a town cleanup, or has a town-wide pizza party, or a picnic, and reach out with good and try to draw people in through that, rather than try to persuade people with contentious discussions or other ways like that. If you continually put a name forward with good intentions behind it, and people see that this organization is doing this in my community that helps my community in this way or that way, it triggers something in somebody's mind to associate that group or whatever with something that is good, and it wears away at people's kind of walls that they put up. And so that's one way to kind of reach out to people without having kind of direct arguments, or trying to persuade people all in one conversation. Rather than doing that, you can wear people down over the long term by just doing good.
Others in that group.
He particularly focused on ideas that surround food, like pizza parties or cleanup days that then end up in pizza parties. So I think food is a very big motivator.
Good. We all need social action and a good meal.
Yeah.
Somebody else in our group suggested that we could, make a commitment to finding a couple people every week, that we strike up a conversation with a couple people with whom we might not agree, and just have a random quick conversation, just kind of I don't think he called it an icebreaker, but that notion of not always hanging or saying people you agree with, or staying silent among the people who don't agree with you.
Mhm. Scott had a similar idea in my group around conversations that can bridge political divide. And I suggested the living room conversation as a facilitative conversation ways to do that.
You guys keep putting things in the chat. So, you know, even just those ideas that then we'll have a visual record as well.
Ursula, can I call on you to share ideas?
What? I think one of the most powerful ideas I've heard, and I've certainly seen borne out with this group, is it is the grassroots efforts of your local elections, your city council races that are like, okay, 53 to 24 or what, you know, whatever, but just paying attention to local situations, because that's where the polls are. That's how the polls are administered and overseen. That's where your voting rights are with their boots on the ground.
Great. And other ideas from our group. Scott had the idea of message discipline, and suggested that we need to end money in politics and end Citizens United. Ideas around making sure folks are able to vote and participate, and that we need to continue to educate others.
Olivia, how many breakout rooms?
There were 4, so I don't think we heard from all 4 yet. Which rooms have we not heard from?
I think Paul from our breakout room had our collective comment.
Yep, I do. The various demagogues in our group gave me these marching orders. Here was our list, and Forrest started us off just a second ago with the idea of making sure that everyone's able to vote, and that Able New Hampshire has worked on that kind of thing quite well. We got interested in possibilities of ranked voting, and that being something that might be very helpful to opening up democracy, perhaps. Get involved with grassroots organizing, political organizing, and otherwise. Really focus on try to talk across the divide. There are common issues, and the book had mentioned one of those. Don't focus on abortion necessarily, but focus on healthcare. That's a common issue. Let's look for the common issues. To get involved in election boards or run for election boards is a thing. Asking candidates what they stand for, getting involved in forums, trying to insist that candidates, talk about their agendas. Focusing on turnout. Gerrymandering is one thing and has to be fought, but a lot of people don't come to, don't get out to vote. Let's focus on getting bigger turnouts. What did I leave off, gang? Are there other ideas that we had?
I think that we are running out of time almost.
Yeah. So I wanted to make sure William Bridgman just popped in here with kind of a rather large idea, and he can put some of it in the chat. Our group also said many of the same things, common good. Talked about a positive sign of many young workers and young people and workers all over the country getting more involved in collective bargaining. We saw that as a positive sign. Talked quite a lot about, again, just doing things at the local level. Don't be defeated. Work on the gun violence issue in your area. Work on understanding what your legislators think about things and influencing them. But William, are you still here?
Yes, I am.
Okay, just very, very quickly. And then, as I say, if you'll put some stuff in the chat, that'd be good.
Yes, well, thank you. And my concept was that we need to find a way to make Congress more accountable for serving the will of the people. And the way that I believe we can do that, although it would require a constitutional amendment, so it's a very long-term concept, is to allow the nation as a whole to vote on Congress's performance every once in a while, maybe once every 8 or 10 years. And if there's a supermajority of Americans who say Congress is not serving us appropriately, that puts a substantial number of the senior members of Congress at career risk, meaning they're no longer allowed to serve in Congress and they're replaced in their districts and states. But the concept basically is not to have that happen, but rather to change the behaviors of the people in Congress so that they do reach consensus, they compromise, and they avoid the threat of that kind of termination. And it's the way that so many other organizations work. Whenever you need some kind of team spirit, you hold the members of the team collectively accountable for what they do. The question in my mind is, can we do something like that for Congress that then generates a much more constructive collective performance from them?
Thank you for a quick synopsis, keeping us, I think, just about at the time limit, right, Olivia?
Yep, so our next book is,
we have
Oh,
run
sorry, Forrest.
out of time.
Okay. Yep,
our
we are,
our
but
next
we
book is
will,
June 9th at 7 o'clock, The Sum of Us. So please join us again on June 9th. And of course, send your book club ideas for our follow-up for other book clubs. I see Scott's already put one in the chat. So, lots of good ideas come from this group. So
yeah,
thank you.
the ultimate crowdsourcing.
Thank you all so much and have a wonderful night. We'll see you again at the next book club, if not before.
Happy
Thank you.
Easter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for keeping it going.
You help, you keep it going.
Yeah, I think